Apart from sources of Indian history, now let us see inscriptions. For more important than coins are inscriptions. The study is called epigraphy, and the study of the old writing used in inscriptions and other old records is called paleography. Inscriptions were carved on seals, stone pillars, rocks, copper plates, temple walls, wooden tables, and bricks or images. In India as a whole, the earliest inscriptions were recorded on stone. However, in the early centuries of the Christian era, copper plate began to be used for this purpose. Even then, the practice of engraving inscriptions on stone continued on a large scale in South India. We have also in that region a large number of inscriptions regarded on the walls of temples to serve as permanent records. Like coins, inscriptions are preserved in various museums of the country, but the largest number may be found in the office of the epigraphist at Mysore. The earliest inscriptions were written in Prakrit in the 3rd century BC. Sanskrit was adopted as an epigraphic medium in the 2nd century AD, and its use became widespread in the 4th and 5th centuries, but even then Sanskrit continued to be used. Inscriptions began to be composed in regional languages in the 9th and 10th centuries. Most inscriptions bearing on the history of the Maurya, post-Maurya and Gupta periods have been published in a series of collections called Corpus Inscriptionum Indicarum, but not many inscriptions of the post-Gupta period in such systematic compilations. In the case of South India, topographical lists of inscriptions have been published. Still, over 50,000 inscriptions, mostly of South India, await publication. The Harappan inscriptions, which await decipherment, seem to have been written in a pictographic script in which ideas and objects were expressed in the form of pictures. Most Ashokan inscriptions were engraved in the Brahmi script, which was written from left to right, but some were also incised in the Kharoshthi script, which was written from right to left. However, the Brahmi script prevailed virtually all over India except for the northwestern part. Greek and Aramaic scripts were employed in writing Ashokan inscriptions in Pakistan and Afghanistan, but Brahmi continues to be the main script till the end of Gupta times. An epigraphist can decipher most Indian inscriptions up to about the 7th century if he has mastered Brahmi and its variations, but subsequently we notice strong regional variations in the script. Inscriptions found on the seals of Harappa belonging to about 2500 BC are considered symbolic by some scholars. For Indian history, the earliest deciphered inscriptions are Iranian. They belong to the 6th to 5th centuries BC and are found in Iran. They appear in Old Indo-Iranian and also in Semitic languages in the cuneiform script. They speak of the Iranian conquest of the Hindu or Sindhu area. Of course, in India, the earliest deciphered are Ashokan inscriptions. They are generally written in Brahmi script and Prakrit language in the 3rd century BC. They throw light on Maurya history and Ashoka's achievements. In the 14th century AD, 2 Ashokan pillar inscriptions were found by Firoz Shah Tughlaq, one in Meerut and another at the place called Topra in Haryana. He brought them to Delhi and asked the Pandits of his empire to decipher the inscriptions, but they failed to do so. The same difficulty was faced by the British when in the last quarter of the 18th century, they discovered Ashokan inscriptions. These epigraphs were first deciphered in 1837 by James Prinsep, a civil servant in the employ of the East India Company in Bengal. We have various types of inscriptions. Some convey royal orders and decisions regarding social, religious and administrative matters to officials and the people in general. Ashokan inscriptions belong to this category. Others are votive records of the followers of Buddhism, Jainism, Vaishnavism, Shaivism and the like. They appear on pillars, tablets, temples or images as marks of devotion. Yet other types attributes the achievements of the kings and conquerors and ignore their defeats or weaknesses. To this category belongs the Allahabad pillar inscription of Samudragupta. Finally, we have many donative records which refer especially to gifts of money, cattle, land, etc., mainly for religious purposes, made not only by kings and princes but also by artisans and merchants. Inscriptions recording land grants made mainly by chiefs and princes are very important for the study of the land system and administration in ancient India. These were mostly engraved on copper plates. They record grants of lands, revenues and villages made to monks, priests, temples, monasteries, vassals and officials. They were written in all languages including Prakrit, Sanskrit, Tamil and Telugu. So now let's move on to the literary sources. Although the ancient Indians knew how to write as early as 2500 BC, our most ancient manuscripts are not older than the AD 4th century and are found in Central Asia. In India, they were written on brick bark and palm leaves, but in Central Asia, where the Prakrit language had spread from India, manuscripts were also written on sheep leather and wooden tablets. These writings are called inscriptions, but they are as good as manuscripts. When printing was not known, manuscripts were very highly valued. Although old Sanskrit manuscripts are found all over India, they mostly relate to South India, Kashmir and Nepal. Currently, inscriptions are largely preserved in museums and manuscripts in libraries. Most ancient books contain religious themes. Hindu religious literature includes the Vedas, the Ramayana and Mahabharata, the Puranas and the like. They throw considerable light on the social and cultural conditions of ancient times, but it is difficult to use them in the context of time and place. The Rig Veda may be assigned to 1500 to 1000 BC, though such collections as the Atharva Veda, Yajur Veda, the Brahmanas, Aranyakas and the Upanishads date roughly to 1000 to 500 BC. Almost every Vedic text contains interpolations which generally appear at the beginning or the end and seldom in the middle. The Rig Veda mainly comprises prayers, whereas the later Vedic texts comprise prayers as well as rituals, magic and mythological stories. However, the Upanishads contain philosophical speculations. In order to understand the Vedic texts, it was necessary to study the Vedangas or the limbs of the Veda. These supplements of the Veda comprised phonetics, that is Siksha, ritual, Kalpa, grammar, Vyakarana, etymology, Nirukta, metrics, Chanda, and astronomy, Jyotisha, and much literature grew around each of these subjects. They were written in the form of precepts in prose. A precept was called a sutra because of its brevity. The most famous example of this writing is the grammar of Panini, written around 450 BC. While illustrating the rules of grammar, Panini casts invaluable light on the society, economy, and culture of his times. The two epics and the major Puranas seem to have been finally compiled by 400 AD. Of the epics, the Mahabharata, attributed to Vyasa, is older and possibly reflects the state of affairs from the 10th century BC to 4th century AD. Originally, it consisted of 8,800 verses and was called Jaya, or a collection dealing with victory. These were increased to 24,000 and came to be known as Bharata because it contains the stories of the descendants of one of the earliest Vedic tribes called Bharata. The final compilation increased the verses to 100,000, which came to be known as the Mahabharata or Shatasahasri Samhita. It contains narrative, descriptive, and didactic material. The main narrative, which relates to the Kaurava-Pandava conflict, may relate to the later Vedic period. The descriptive portion might be of the post-Vedic period, and the didactic portion generally relates to the post-Maurya and Gupta periods. Similarly, the Ramayana of Valmiki originally consisted of 6,000 verses, which were raised to 12,000 and eventually to 24,000. Although this epic appears to be more unified than the Mahabharata, it too has its didactic parts which were subsequently added. The Ramayana composition started in the 5th century BC. After that, it passed through as many as 5 stages, and the 5th stage seems to have been as late as the 12th century AD. As a whole, the text seems to have been composed later than the Mahabharata. Shrauta Sutras, Griha Sutras, Sulva Sutras belongs to 600 to 300 BC. The religious books of the Jainas and the Buddhists refer to historical persons and incidents. The earliest Buddhist texts were written in Pali, which was spoken in Magadha or South Bihar and was basically a form of Prakrit. They were finally compiled in the 1st century BC in Sri Lanka, but the canonical portions reflect the state of affairs in India in the age of the Buddha. They tell us not only about the life of the Buddha, but also about some of his royal contemporaries who ruled over Magadha, North Bihar, and Eastern UP. The most important and interesting portion of the non-canonical literature is provided by the stories of the previous births of Gautama Buddha. It was believed that before he was actually born in Gautama, the Buddha passed through over 550 births, in many cases in the form of animals. Each birth story is called a Jataka, which is a folk tale. The Jatakas throw invaluable light on the social and economic conditions of the period between the 5th and 2nd centuries BC. They also make incidental references to political events in the age of the Buddha. The Jaina texts were written in Prakrit and were eventually compiled in AD 6th century in Vallabhi in Gujarat. They, however, contain many passages that help us to reconstruct the political history of eastern Uttar Pradesh and Bihar in the age of Mahavira. The Jaina texts refer repeatedly to trade and traders. We also have a large body of secular literature. To this class belong the law books called the Dharma Sutras and Smritis, which together with their commentaries are called Dharma Shastras. The Dharma Sutras were compiled in 500 to 200 BC, and the principal Smritis were codified in the first 6th centuries of the Christian era. They prescribe the duties to be performed by the different Varnas as well as by kings and their officials. They set out the rules for marriage together with the laws according to which property is to be held, sold and inherited. They also prescribe punishments for persons guilty of theft, assault, murder, adultery and the like. An important law book is the Arthashastra of Kautilya. The text is divided into 15 books, of which books 2 and 3 may be regarded as being of an earlier date and seem to have been the work of different hands. This text was put in its final form in the beginning of the Christian era, but its earliest portions reflect the state of society and economy in the age of the Mauryas. It provides rich material for the study of ancient Indian polity and economy. Of the non-religious texts, the grammatical works are very important for historical construction. They begin with the Ashtadhyayi of Panini. Panini lived in the northwestern part of the subcontinent. He is not mentioned in the Pali texts, which principally represent Bihar and UP. Panini is dated to around 450 BC by V.S. Agarwala, who has written about Panini's India in both Hindi and English. In his view, no other text provides as much information about the Janapadas or territorial states of pre-Mauryan times as Panini does. Patanjali's commentary on Panini dated 150 BC supplies valuable information about post-Maurya times. We also have the works of Bhasha, Sudraka, Kalidasa and Banabhatta. Apart from their literary value, they mirror the conditions of the times to which the writers belonged. The works of Kalidasa comprise kavyas and dramas, the most famous of which is Abhignana Shakuntalam. Besides being great creative compositions, they provide us with glimpses of the social and cultural life of the Guptas. In addition to Sanskrit sources, we have some of the earliest Tamil texts in the corpus of Sangam literature. This literature was produced over a period of 3 to 4 centuries by poets who assembled in colleges patronized by the chiefs and kings. Such colleges were called Sangam, and the literature produced in these assemblies was known as Sangam literature. The compilation of the corpus is attributed to the first 4 Christian centuries, although they were really completed by the 6th century. The Sangam literature comprises about 30,000 lines of poetry arranged in 8 anthologies called Yettutokai. The poems were collected in groups of hundreds such as Purana Nuru, the 400 of the exterior. There are 2 main groups, Inenkil Kannakku, the 18 lower collections, and Pattu Pattu, the 10 songs. The former is generally assumed to be older than the latter, and hence is considered to be of great historical importance. The Sangam texts have several layers, but at present these cannot be established on the basis of style and content, but as shown later, they can be detected on the basis of stages in social evolution. The Sangam texts are different from the Vedic texts, particularly the Rig Veda. They do not constitute religious literature. The short and long poems were composed by numerous poets in praise of various heroes and heroines and are thus secular in nature. They are not primitive songs but literature of high quality. Many poems mention a warrior or a chief or a king by name and describe in detail his military exploits. The gifts made by him to bards and warriors are celebrated. These poems may have been recited in the courts. They are compared with the heroic poetry of the Homeric age, for they represent a heroic age of warriors and battles. It is difficult to use these texts for historical purposes. Perhaps the proper names, titles, dynasties, territories, wars, and the like mentioned in the poems are partly real. Some of the Chera kings mentioned in the Sangam text also appear as donors in inscriptions of the 1st and 2nd centuries. The Sangam texts refer to many settlements including Kaveri Patnam, whose flourishing existence has now been archaeologically corroborated. They also speak of the Yavanas coming in their own vessels, purchasing pepper with gold and supplying wine and women slaves to the natives. This trade is known not only from Latin and Greek writings but also from the archaeological record. The Sangam literature is a major source of our information for the social, economic and political life of the people living in deltaic Tamil Nadu in the early Christian centuries. What it says about trade and commerce is confirmed by foreign accounts and archaeological finds. Now let us move to foreign accounts. Indigenous literature can be supplemented by foreign accounts. To India came Greek, Roman and Chinese visitors either as travelers or religious converts, and they left behind accounts of the things that they saw. It is remarkable that Alexander's invasion finds no mention in Indian sources, and it is entirely on the basis of the Greek sources that we have to reconstruct the history of his Indian exploits. The Greek writers mention Sandrakottas, a contemporary of Alexander the Great, who invaded India in 326 BC. Prince Sandrakottas is identified with Chandragupta Maurya, whose date of accession is fixed at 322 BC. This identification has served as the sheet anchor in ancient Indian chronology. The Indica of Megasthenes, who came to the court of Chandragupta Maurya, has been preserved only in fragments quoted by subsequent classical writers. These fragments, when read together, furnish valuable information not only about the system of Maurya administration but also about social classes and economical activities in the Maurya period. The Indica is not free from credulity and exaggerations, which is true of many other ancient accounts. Greek and Roman accounts of the 1st and 2nd centuries mention many Indian ports and enumerate items of trade between India and the Roman Empire. The Periplus of the Erythraean Sea and Ptolemy's Geography, both written in Greek, provide valuable data for the study of ancient geography and commerce. The date ascribed to the first ranges between 80 to 150 AD, whereas the second is attributed to 150 AD. The Periplus of the Erythraean Sea, which was written by an anonymous author, describes the Roman trade in the Red Sea, Persian Gulf and the Indian Ocean. Pliny's Naturalis Historia, which relates to the 1st century, was written in Latin and tells us about trade between India and Italy. The last Greco-Roman scholar who wrote on India was called Cosmos Indicopleustes. He hailed from Alexandria, a center of Hellenistic culture in Egypt. Around 550, he wrote the Christian topography, which mentions Christians in India and Sri Lanka and also refers to horse trade. Of the Chinese travelers, mention may be made by Fahian and Huansang. Both of them were Buddhists and came to this country to visit the Buddhist shrines and to study Buddhism. The first came in the beginning of the 5th century and the second in the second quarter of the 7th century. Fahian describes the social, religious and economic conditions in India in the age of the Guptas, and Huansang presents a similar account of India in the age of Harsha. Hope you may like this content, and we will continue with further subjects. Thank you.